Testing, testing. Testing, test. Testing. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, another microphone. What do you know? Testing, another microphone.
All right, so we're supposed to have. Oh, I'm gonna go get.
That might be
Sure. Yeah. The journal.
share a little bit. We have a submittable, so
Oh, beautiful. That makes my heart so happy.
yeah, and there's no fee to submit.
Oh, that's awesome. Daily poetry review.
Yeah,
Because those feeds add up.
they add up.
My God.
Yeah.
Homes for 6 months and tell me no.
And the next time, it's sort of like, yeah. It's like, the next
All right. Oh, hello. Can everybody hear me? Hi, everybody. My name is MP Carver, a festival director, and I'm very, very happy to welcome you back to the State of Poetry panel. This year's panelists, and I'll read all their bios, are Eileen Cleary, Mckendy Fils-Aimé, Jennifer Jean, and Kimiko Hahn. And I actually have to make a note that this event has been running at the festival for many, many years. Jennifer Jean is actually the founder and originator of this particular event. And we're so glad now to have her here as part of the panel. So, okay, so I'll start with our host today, Cristela. Cristela Guerra is a senior arts and culture. Wrote human interest features covering everything from blizzards to arts to immigration, as well as breaking news around New England. Eileen Cleary is the author of Child Ward of the Commonwealth, which received an honorable mention for the Sheila Margaret Naughton Book Prize, and 2 A.M. with Keats from Nix's Mate. In addition, she co-edited the anthology Voices Amidst the Virus, the featured text at the 2021 Michigan State University Filmetry Festival, and founded Lily Poetry Review Books and the Lily Poetry Review. Recent work is included in Tree Lines, 21st Century American Poetry, just out through Grayson Books. Mckendy Fils-Aimé is a New England-based Haitian-American poet and educator. He is a 9-time veteran and perennial slam semifinalist of the National Poetry Slam, where he has represented venues from Boston, Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts, and Manchester, New Hampshire. Mckendy has been an artist in residence for Mass Leap, as well as the Art Alliance of Northern New Hampshire. He is a Callaloo Creative Writing Fellow whose work has appeared in Boxcar Poetry Review, The Collegist, The Journal, Callaloo, and elsewhere. Jennifer Jean's poetry collections include Vose and The Fool, as well as Object Lesson, which is about sex trafficking and objectification in America. Her teaching resource book is Object Lesson, A Guide to Writing Poetry. Jennifer is a co-editor and co-translator of an anthology in development titled Other Paths for Shahrazad, Contemporary Poetry by Arab Women. She's received honors, residencies, and fellowships from the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, Disquiet, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Her Story Is Collection, the Academy of American Poets, the Kolkata International Poetry Festival, and the Women's Federation for World Peace. Jennifer's poetry and co-translations have appeared in Poetry, Rattle, The Common, Waxwing, On the Seawall, DMQ, Salamander, Terrain, and elsewhere. She edits translations for Consequence Forum and is the senior program manager of 24 Pearl Street, the Fine Arts Works Center's online writing program. Kimiko Hahn is the author of 10 books of poems, including Foreign Bodies and Toxic Flora, all collections prompted by science. The Narrow Road to the Interior, a collection that takes its title from Basho's famous poetic journal, The Unbearable Heart, which received an American Book Award. Earshot, which was awarded the Theodore Rothke Memorial Poetry Prize, and an Association of Asian American Studies Literature Award. Hahn's honors include a Guggenheim Fellowship, Penn Volcker Award, Shelley Memorial Prize, a Leela Wallace Reader's Digest Writers Award, as well as fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the New York Foundations for the Arts. She lives in New York, where she is a distinguished professor in the MFA program in creative writing in literary translations at Queen College, the City University of New York. And I'll just say about all of our fine panelists, we tried to invite distinguished panelists who would have a wide range of views and perspectives on the poetry world. And so I'm so excited to hear what they have to say, and please join me in welcoming them.
Check, check. Can everyone hear me okay? How's everybody doing? Are we feeling good? It's really beautiful outside. I am very honored to be back. I hosted this panel in 2021 on Zoom, and it was, I think it must have been pretty good because they brought me back. And I distinctly remember even just in that hour being able to delve into sort of the wide range of galaxies and constellations that poetry is. I find it funny that the title is The State of Poetry, and what it brings to mind is the state of matter, as in poetry can be solid, liquid, gas, depending on what you make of it and the moment that you're living through in your process and in your craft. So I have a lot of questions. I am not the kind to talk at people, so I'm going to bring y'all in maybe about 15, 20 minutes. Please consider questions, talk to us. I want to engage as an audience on this topic that I think we all really love. And I always have questions, so, it's not hard to fill the hour, but I think it's important to have sort of an interactive conversation about what poetry means to us at this moment in time. Jennifer, you did not tell me that you were the founder of this event.
Slipped my mind.
Seemingly so. I am a senior arts and culture reporter. My point of view very much is about using the arts to get at issues of race, equity, and social justice. That's frequently, as a poet, what my poetry is about. And so I would ask y'all, in the moment, are there, and we can broaden from here, but are there themes that are just extremely exciting to you right now? What are you adventuring, exploring, considering today versus yesterday or last year?
Themes. Such a big question. I think right now I've been really interested in exploring the Haitian canon. So I'm reading a translation of poems by Ida Faubert, who's a poet from, I think, the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's been really illuminating to just engage with her work and find out about her history and her perspective on what was happening at the time, and also what it means to be somebody like her, who's a woman, who's from Haiti, who also comes from privilege as well, because she was a president's daughter, and what that means to write, to create art from that lens and that perspective. Yeah, so that's kind of where I've been at right now, just reading that kind of content.
Well, I had just finished a manuscript concerning a child who was abducted and returned himself home from Merced, California. And now I have been reading a lot about how children are criminalized early in certain parts of our country. And so I've been doing kind of a deep dive into exploring that sort of social phenomenon and how it happens and trying to humanize that situation.
Hi, everyone. I've been writing a lot of poetry that I call eco-poetry, but it's all set in the city quite a bit, or people coming from the city going to the ocean. And so I just feel like I'm exploring that realm and hopefully, okay, this is going to sound grandiose, but redefining or being a part of the redefinition of what an eco-poem is. That's on one side. That's my own work. And then right before we came in here, Kimiko and I were talking, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but we were talking about translation work and yeah, just I'm delving deep into working on co-translation teams. That was mentioned in my bio. I'm learning a new language, like 15 minutes a day, but I've been doing that for a couple of years, and it's starting to stick, I think. I've been learning Korean, and I'm hoping to do translation on my own, but that's big. I just think bringing more, the world, we all know this, the world is small, so bringing more and more poetries to America, that's just, might as well jump in that pool and swim around, because that's where it's at. That's my opinion about things right now, the state of things.
Hi, thank you. I'll jump off of that translation, but with a slight tilt to it, and that is poetry that's multivocal, texts that are multivocal, and also texts that are hybrid, whether it's media or different genres combined in a text. I write, and I have been writing for a number of years in a Japanese genre called the zuihitsu. So I'm very interested in kind of bringing that out more into the world. And as far as hybrid texts, commercial introduction, I'm teaching at Fine Arts Rec Center hybrid text class, so. So that's what I'm interested in, and I'm interested to see what other people come up with.
Pretty sneaky. This is why I love poets, because you could, it's just, there's this broad range of subjects, interests, and I think on any given day or month or year of your life, it could change. I have a bunch of thoughts, but I'm wondering if we can start. Eileen, would you be open, since I was thinking about poetry, the state of poetry pre-pandemic versus post. Could you talk a bit about how you were sort of unpacking grief and like ideas of grief in relation to poetry during that time?
So, right when the pandemic hit, I'm a hospice nurse, and at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was also losing one of my dear friends, Lucy Brock-Broido, and I was also having to counsel my patients as they had to accept the fact that they wouldn't be able to die of what they had thought how they would die. They thought maybe cancer or heart disease, but then they realized pretty soon that more than likely they would die of COVID before they had an opportunity. And also at that time, I was working without enough protection, and it was before the vaccines came out. So I also was confronting my own mortality every night when I went to work. And so I started writing to Keats about how, and tried to provide some grief counseling for him about he had died in a pandemic of sorts, tuberculosis, at a young age. And I also wanted him to welcome Lucy to the other side, my friend. And I was able to kind of work through some of that grief through that book, 2 a.m. with Keats.
Well, and I'm wondering if others can talk about process. Yeah. Process, how's it changed post-pandemic? I sort of addressed the sort of realist, most direct thing up front, not because we need to sort of linger in a place of like heaviness, but more like I think it's a time of catharsis. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a pivot point out of a time where we weren't really together, and now we're together, and I feel like every time I moderate a panel, I'm so giddy to be together, you know? So what how has your poetry changed? Because I find, Eileen, that story, when you told me, when we spoke before this, it's fascinating. And it was so fruitful and cathartic, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so my poetry has changed, but I feel like, it changed through the working on translations. That's one thing. And then I was doing translations before, but then, you have more time. You do whatever you were doing before more when things are locked down. So that was my case. And so my poetry has changed from that process for sure. But also, I just keep thinking, it just feels like there's something new on the horizon. I don't know what it is. I feel like in every area of life, but okay, so we're talking about poetry, so let's narrow it down. In poetry, I just feel like there's some form or maybe it's a movement. What was the last movement in poetry? I actually don't know. I can't think of it. Maybe you all can throw something out, but what was it? We're due. Something's coming, something's gonna happen, and I feel like it's good. I don't know if I'm a psychic or anything, but I don't feel bad about it. I just feel like something good, like I feel like I'm looking around, I want to keep my eye out for whatever that thing is. That's why I'm trying to, when I spoke earlier, I said I want to be part of redefining eco-poetry. I don't know if that's what it is, that next new thing, but I'm just checking it out in case it is. Maybe, I don't know.
As far as movements, that's an interesting question. I think one of the most, the most important poetry organization now and in the past 25 years has been Cave Canem. It has absolutely changed the landscape of poetry. I think more recently, the O Miami Festival, if you're familiar, O Miami in the month of April has a mission to put poetry in front of every Miamian, and that includes incredibly inventive ways. Edible stickers on fruit.
That's cool.
just writing in sand, which of course is very ephemeral. So I talk about bringing poetry out and off the page, but also realizing that poetry is already out there. It is out there. It's not a stage versus chairs. It's already out there, and people are already involved in poetry. So what O Miami does is recognize that and amplify it. And so I think there are movements, they're just not called that, but I think they're important social winds and currents.
Nothing at the moment.
If it comes up, you tell me.
Definitely.
Questions? Yes, in the back. That was really fast.
Do you think that the poetry industry or market tends to bottleneck new poets that are coming in, new talents? Because it just seems to me like the industry tends to monopolize and dictate and elevates who they want. What's your take on that?
I think I understand what you're saying, and I think that one of the issues is that there are so many talented poets out there who are really tenacious, and it feels like there are so few opportunities to put work out there, and so it can kind of create that bottleneck effect. It also can kind of sometimes feel like poetry is selecting or championing maybe a handful of folks at any given time. And I don't have a solution for that, but I just want to say that I do understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I also hear that. I think that there are so many poetry communities, and sometimes we forget the value of our immediate community, where people can be celebrated within that community. And I think the stakes are low in terms of rewards for poetry, other than in the writing of it itself. And so I think we need to lean on each other. And I do see so many festivals and new reading series and all sorts of community building going on all over Massachusetts. And I think lean into that community and it would feel much better.
Yeah, I completely agree with what both of you have been saying. And I have felt that too, and sometimes I feel like it's an illusion because of what they're saying, like that bottleneck thing, because there are opportunities. I think that's essentially what you're both saying. There are these opportunities, and sometimes it feels like in many places in life that there's just one track that you can follow, but that's an illusion. It's not true, especially now the way tech is. We were just talking beforehand about self-publishing and how it's like there was a stigma around self-publishing, not so much anymore, I think. She thinks too, from what I know. You agree too? Yeah, not so much of a stigma because you can put out a quality product. You can hire an editor, you can hire a publicist, you can hire a social media manager, you can hire, and then you can not hire people, you can go into your community, local community. And it's just, so in some ways, it's an illusion. That's what I tell myself when I get depressed about that the thing you're bringing up. But it works when I tell myself that, like, oh yes, Jennifer, you can break through this, and it's worked for me. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I would just add to that the opportunities are so much greater than they were before technology advanced. So on the one hand, if you're just looking at who's getting published in, say, the New Yorker, there's a bottleneck, or who's getting accepted into Iowa or something like that, it's a bottleneck. If you're just looking at that tiny ether like area, then perhaps there is a bottleneck. But if you really look at what's going on, 15 years ago, I looked at chapbooks as kind of a vanity press. And I was absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And I've become a huge chapbook advocate. I've created an archive in my school library, and I'm teaching right now a chapbook craft class. I was absolutely wrong, and it's the first place that many emerging poets will get published. And zines. We're doing zines right now, too.
I have an overwhelming collection of poetry at my house, to the point that when I move, there are many boxes, and it is uncomfortable. But I'm never going to get rid of any of them, and a lot of them are chapbooks and zines bought at open mics. The only thing I'd add is I feel like during the pandemic, especially as an arts and culture reporter who was covering artists who were struggling, venues, places, when they shut down, they didn't come back. Right. You know, and so what are the spaces where poetry is being elevated and seen locally and nationally and regionally? And she's going to get mad at me for calling her out. Portia O is doing, as the Boston Poet Laureate, is doing incredible events, including one I just went to at the Gardner Museum called Canyon, and Canon Poetry Reading. So I'd like to give it up for Portia O. Especially during National Poetry Month, there were free poetry workshops in Roxbury at the library. They're just remarkable access to consider that maybe poetry is a medium that anybody can find the words to explore, if allowed to. You know, if poetry has been the thing that when you don't have words, you go to a poem. Other questions?
That was good.
Yeah, right in front.
I want to get a sense of the panelists' concern or embrace of ChatGPT and AI creativity or AI stealing of the autonomy of the individual artist.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Thank you. Yeah, good question.
I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous about ChatGPT, but because, you know, it's automating this writing, but I want to believe that it can't replicate the soul, right? And so that's what I'm holding out for, and I'm hoping that enough people realize that, but who's to say? And so I also hope that magazines and journals continue to find new ways in detecting work that's created using some of these automation services.
Yeah, this just reminds me that I need to update the guidelines for Lily in terms of what will be accepted in terms of that. It's sometimes very easy to spy, and but as it advances, it may be less easy and less obvious. Yeah. And I just wanted to mention another big thing that's happening a lot, which is not a bad thing, is visual poetry. And we were talking about movements, asemic writing and that sort of thing. But back to the chat GPS.
Yeah, so on my Instagram, I posted that question about AI poetry will soon be ubiquitous. And, you know, I've posted all kinds of questions nobody answers. But people answered this one, and on Twitter too. And one person made a really interesting point that poetry has always been a niche thing. So people doing the AI thing will have their own niche, and then real folks with souls will just be another niche. It might take some time to shake it out, you know, but we're always a niche and small, and so we'll just congregate in person here, and we'll find each other. I thought that was interesting. The thing that makes me worried is more about in schools, is that when a teacher, all excited about poetry, teaches it, and the students go home and then they just put it in the chat GPT or whatever, the AI, and then they never have the experience. So then it'll become rare, you know, for when they get older. I wrote my first poem when I was 7 or something because of a teacher, and I found it years later at 14, like, oh, I wrote this, and then poetry is a possibility. That's how it came for me. I'm sure many of you, too, were taught in school, and that's part of your evolution as a poet. So that's one thing I'm worried about, but I still think like all the arts, because there's visual artists have to deal with it, playwrights, you know, like script writers, there's the writers on strike in Hollywood right now, what's going on with journalists, you know, there's all kinds of like we're not the only ones, but I think it'll shake out after a while, and I think guidelines, I'm so glad you said that, guidelines will help where people just acknowledge, okay, this is a thing, and we find our community, and the robots will have their community.
Yeah, my husband, who writes nonfiction, has been using it for research, but then he has to check every detail and then rewrite it in his voice. So he's been talking about it nonstop. And then, so he asked the chat, whatever you call it, to write a poem in the style of Kimiko Hahn. It was terrible. It was terrible. I think at best it will be a niche collaborative. I don't know.
Has anybody watched Battlestar Galactica?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, no good can come of this.
Yeah.
I'm just like putting that out there for all of us science fiction fans. Like, we've talked about this already. We know what happens. You know, we know who took down the Titans. So I'm just saying, it's not ideal, not ideal. And then, you know, soulless until they're not soulless.
Oh, that's Star Trek.
It is. We've written all these stories already. I don't understand us.
Yeah.
And this hubris.
We're stubborn.
More than stubborn.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, we could talk for hours about this. I'm a big geek. Other questions that are being prompted, unless I had one.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, there seems to me to be a book that all of these things are hovering around that was published by Lewis Hyde called The Gift, The Erotic Life of Property. And it is about making art in this marketplace mindset. And if I can boil it down, he differentiates between a work of art and how it becomes a commodity.
Totally.
And this is true of books. Books are a means of discourse in the culture, but they're also a commodity for sale.
Right.
And there's a collision between them. I think this speaks to the question of the bottleneck or all of that. So his idea of the gift economy is that art is a gift that comes to the artist and through the artist back to the community. And when you put a price tag on it, you've immediately compromised that relationship.
Yeah.
You've also cooperated with a system that creates, that runs on creating scarcity. You know, which is why we have the 1% have sucked all this wealth up there, because now they're the big shots, they have all this.
Right.
Whereas the gift economy would be one in which the person who circulates the most gifts to their community is the big shot. So it's a whole other value system. And art is the last preserve of the gift economy value system.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we as artists think of it that way, instead of how many books did I sell, and let me check my my Ingram page, and all of that. It's for one thing, it's healthy for us. It makes me want to write more.
Yeah.
You know, if it didn't cost me time, my education and all the rest of that, I would give it away.
Totally.
In fact, most of the time, you end up doing that whether you want to or not. How many poets have gotten paid to read in the last 2 or 3 years? How many people have been reading so that maybe somebody passes the hat,
Yeah.
But the spirit of it can't be lost. Or else we may as well have our poems come out of Chat GPT. As you said, there's no soul in it.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
But that book, I just want to put it out there.
Yeah, it's a good book.
It's a very encouraging and illuminating book, The Gift.
Brings up two things for me. There's a poet, and they're not doing it anymore, but at Odd Meter Coffee in Salem, who would have a little basket, and there would be these parchments with typed poems and a wax seal, which I'm assuming this person worked very hard on. And it was any season, there was poetry about that moment in their life with an Instagram account and a Venmo. And I bought a lot of that person's poems because I needed a poem for the day, and I love the idea of the surprise of this gift. And simultaneously, as an arts and culture reporter, especially looking at how friends who do all kinds of art haven't been paid accordingly and have been living off of grants, you know, or all of the work that they had in 2020, 80% was gone in a heartbeat, you know? And so then suddenly you were having like, you know, drag shows on Zoom, and people were getting really creative on technology. So it's this odd sort of intersection of when does it benefit us and when are we replacing ourselves, right? You know, and who does get the notoriety and the publicity?